It wasn't the silence that broke him. It was the timestamp. 9:47 p.m. Pacific. The exact moment when Staff Sergeant Ethan Callahan, stationed 3,000 miles away at a surveillance node in northern Yukon, received what he would later call the last real message from my wife. Lauren had always been economical with words. The message was short-clipped, almost polite. "Don't try to call. I need space. Taking the kids to my sister's. Be safe. No emoji. No sign-off. Just clinical absence." Ethan didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because exactly 41 seconds later, his military-issued AI monitoring subroutine pinged on his private channel. Home intrusion alert. Living room emotion confirmed. Voice recognition anomaly detected. He tapped the link. The system nicknamed Halo was something he had built himself not for paranoia but for peace of mind. 3 camera feeds flickered into view. The foyer, the staircase, the family room, and there she was, Lauren. In the sweater he'd given her before his last tour, laughing, but not at the kids, not with her sister, not alone. The man behind her had a wine glass in one hand and his other hand on her waist. They were dancing, slowly, to a song Ethan couldn't hear. It was the same room where Ethan had proposed to her 7 years earlier. Same corner where Sophie took her first steps. Same couch where Aiden cried after failing his math test last semester. Now it was a stage for something else. Something rehearsed. Something wrong. The man leaned in, kissed her neck. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Ethan watched without blinking, not from numbness, but calculation. His pulse dropped, not rose. His breathing slowed. It wasn't heartbreak. It was intel gathering, a quiet shift from husband to operative. He zoomed in on the intruder's face. Facial ID returned. No match. System flagged the voice pattern from previous audio logs. Similar cadence detected in guest room session 2. WAV March 3rd. He opened the old file. There it was. That same voice, calm and polished, asking Aiden, "And does your dad ever talk about work at home? You know, like secret stuff." At the time, Ethan had dismissed it. Lauren had said he was just a temporary child therapist from the school district. Just helping the kids process the distance. Don't overthink it, Ethan. Not everything's a mission. Now he was thinking. Hard. The man wasn't just in his house. He was inside the circle, inside the perimeter. A civilian therapist shouldn't know that much about military work schedules. Shouldn't visit on Wednesday nights when Ethan had scheduled encrypted calls. Shouldn't have a key code to deactivate the alarm. Ethan rewound the feed again, frame by frame. At 9:49 p.m., the man bent over, whispered something into Lauren's ear. She laughed, took his hand, and led him upstairs. To Ethan's bedroom, the same room he had deployed from 2 months earlier. Where his flight gear still hung in the closet. Where the nightlight was still shaped like a rocket for Sophie when she crawled in after nightmares. The man dropped his jacket on Ethan's chair. The one engraved with a medal Ethan had earned for preventing a data leak in Kandahar. That detail, that small, stupid disrespect, it broke something quiet inside him. He didn't smash the screen, didn't scream, didn't cry. He recorded the entire feed, clipped it, encrypted it, then opened another window. "Marcus," he typed. "Need secure line. Priority Alpha. Personal." 10 minutes later, his closest friend and comms specialist appeared on a back-channel video. Marcus frowned. "Dude, what happened?" Ethan didn't speak for 5 full seconds. Then he just said, "I've been breached. Not just the house, not just the marriage. It's bigger." Marcus saw the look in his eyes. Didn't ask more. He just replied, "Send the footage. I'll run reverse IP. See where it connects." Ethan nodded, voice low, dead steady. "This isn't just a guy screwing my wife. He's inside my family, and I think he's fishing for classified access through my kids." Marcus blinked, sat back. "You think this is espionage?" Ethan looked past the screen, to the frozen frame, to the jacket on his chair, to Lauren's smile once meant for him. "I think this is war." The silence of military bases is not the quiet of peace, it is the quiet of calculation. Ethan Callahan sat alone in the bunkhouse, screen glow flickering across his sharp, sleepless face. The snow outside Kelowna's northern training station pushed against the windows like static in his brain. He had watched the recording 3 times already. The wine, the jacket, the bedroom, the man, and Lauren. But this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. Heartbreak required trust. What she had done, what she was doing, was something else entirely. He opened Halo's archive, a secure cache of voice memos and time-stamped logs. He hadn't intended to spy on his family when he built it. It was meant to protect his version of being present while deployed. He searched for any log referencing Grady. Hit. March 3rd, April 17th, May 5th. The same voice, same cadence, same warmth. Ethan clicked on the March 3rd file. "Hi, Sophie." The man's voice cooed gently. "Has Daddy talked to you about where he works, what kind of computer he uses?" "No, that's okay. You're very brave." Pause. "Do you think your dad locks things because he's scared?" Ethan's jaw flexed. Sophie would have been 9 then. He ran the April file. This one was worse. "Aiden, when your dad calls, does he ever sound angry or tired? It's not your fault. Sometimes soldiers carry heavy things inside. Heavy things. Like betrayal. Like evidence." Ethan cross-referenced the timestamps with his call schedule. The conversations always occurred within 30 minutes of his planned video calls home, as if Grady knew when to show up, as if he'd been scheduling around Ethan. Aiden had said it weeks ago, offhandedly, while finishing his cereal. "Dr. G always comes when you're about to call. Mom says it's to help us not miss you too much." Ethan hadn't thought much of it then. Now it felt like a clockwork ambush. He switched Halo to admin mode, pulled the metadata from the household security hub. A changelog appeared. 2 months ago, Lauren had overwritten the primary admin key, quietly, without notification. Then a small red flag caught his attention. Under Device Access Remote Commands, a sequence appeared. mind-bridge.link/remote/Grady-cam. Ethan opened a blank search window, entered the full string, access denied. But the root domain pinged back, mindbridge.k. He pulled up the system logs for the past 90 days. Grady had been connected to their home system at least 13 times always, within the 8:10 p.m. window. The final straw came when Ethan searched Lauren's archived messages. He had only ever backed up her phone once months ago for safekeeping. One folder remained untouched, nested beneath calendar data. Inside a thread titled, "Legal Submission, Mindbridge Health," attached a PDF. He opened it. Letterhead Mindbridge Health Consultancy Group. Subject Psychological Behavioral Report, Ethan Callahan. The summary was cold, clinical. Subject displays patterns of emotional withdrawal, volatility under stress, compartmentalization of affect. Recommends further psychological evaluation. Family stability concerns noted. Temporary full custody to maternal guardian advised pending mental health clearance. At the bottom, signed Dr. Thomas Grady, PhD, Family Systems Therapist. There was no license number. Ethan stared at the page, then printed it, folded it, filed it, not for confrontation, for court. He stood, looked out at the snow. This wasn't abandonment, it was premeditated erasure. And Lauren was building a case, brick by brick, lie by lie. So Ethan did what any intelligence analyst would do. He started his own file. He spent the next hour in complete silence, just him and the machine. Halo churned through audio files, combing conversations for flagged phrases, deployment access encryption password. It wasn't legal, but he wasn't building a legal case. He was building a firewall for his children. In clip after clip, a pattern emerged. Grady always began soft, reassuring, harmless. "Sophie, if you were to draw your dad's office, where would the desk be? What side's the window, Aiden? What's the first thing your dad does when he gets home? Does he go straight to the computer?" None of it seemed malicious in isolation, harmless curiosity. But layered across weeks, months, it painted a different story. Aiden once described Grady as cool, said he liked magic tricks. "He always knows what card I'll pick." Ethan stared at the waveform of that clip, the boy's voice casual, trusting. And he realized something terrible. This wasn't a break-in. It was a grooming, not of his wife, of his children. Grady hadn't seduced Lauren in the conventional sense. He'd co-opted her grief, her loneliness. He had watched enough profiles to recognize the tactic: find the weak joint in a military family, tap gently until it cracks. He scrolled back to the admin log. One entry stood out: user invited Thomas.Grady at mbhcn.ca, timestamp 6 weeks before Lauren's first withdrawn video call. She'd let him in, digitally, emotionally, and now legally. Halo issued a soft beep. New file flagged voice note S. Callahan, 092 p.m. Ethan clicked. Sophie's small voice filled the room. Mom says Dr. G is helping make everything normal again. She says it'll be easier once Dad's not so tired all the time. 9 years old, already rehearsing justifications that weren't hers. He slumped back. Not defeated, just recalibrating. He wasn't losing custody. He was losing credibility, from the inside out. And Lauren was arming the narrative. He reopened the report from MindBridge, scanned again. There's Section 4, Domestic Interactions. Subject has exhibited aloofness during digital calls. Child 1 male 13 noted father rarely smiles. Child 2 female 9 referenced father's serious face. Emotional unavailability suggested. It read like a psychological obituary, cold, objective, irrefutable, but it was all angles, edited context. A prosecution disguised as concern. He opened a new document, titled it Callahan v. Pierce, Timeline of Psychological Manipulation. He began typing, fast, clinical, detached. Day 0 deployment briefing, January 3rd, Day 5. First missed video call. Lauren claimed technical error, Day 12. First recorded appearance of Grady voice only. Day 17. Lauren disables halo motion alerts. Day 25. Email to MindBridge sent archive retrieved. Day 31 camera zone in Ethan's home office is repositioned. He paused. Saved the file. Behind him the heating vent kicked on. The sound was like static, like a weak signal barely holding through a snowstorm. He used to believe fidelity broke like glass. One loud shatter, then silence. But this wasn't a shatter. It was erosion, minute by minute, word by word. And somewhere between the hollow phone calls and forced bedtime kisses over video, Lauren had redefined him. From father to threat, from protector to problem. Ethan rose and paced. The room felt smaller, the oxygen thinner. He knew this phased the setup. In intelligence operations, it was called normalization. Establish a presence, build trust, replace loyalty subtly, redirect information pathways, then activate. Was that next? Would he wake up to find a custody injunction already filed? A court-ordered psyche eval based on manufactured data? He pulled out the base issue phone, dialed a secured line. Marcus picked up. Yeah, I need a favor, of course. Name it. I need you to run a silent background trace on MindBridge Health Consultancy and Thomas Grady. Domain is mindbridge.k. No hard queries. Use Ghost DNS tools only. Pause, then got it. Ethan, how deep is this? Ethan's eyes never left the blinking cursor on his screen. She's not just leaving me, Marcus. She's laying the foundation for my deletion. Click. He hung up, sat back down, cracked his knuckles, and began logging the second phase of his own countermeasure. No weapon, no confrontation, just what he'd always been good at: pattern recognition, behavioral mapping, and patience. Because war wasn't loud anymore. Not always. Sometimes it was just the quiet sound of trust draining out the bottom of a marriage like a slow leak. And tonight Ethan heard every drop. The cursor blinked in silence. Ethan stared at the open file he'd labeled counter-narrative_01. Behind the soft click of Halo's idle systems, his thoughts assembled like intelligence threads, scattered but slowly forming a lattice. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't intend to. There are moments in war where time stops being measured in hours or kilometers, but in pattern shifts, behavioral anomalies, unforced disclosures. This was one of those nights. At 0422, Marcus sent a message. Check this. You were right to be suspicious. Attached was a document dump server metadata from mindbridge.ca, names of registered domains, host paths, backlinked shell entities. Most looked generic. Empty shells for digital marketing fronts. But one linked address stood out. mbh-consulting.manitoba-sr.org. Ethan cross-referenced the hosting IP. It had previously belonged to a now-defunct wellness clinic in Winnipeg, a clinic cited 2 years ago for unauthorized psychological diagnostics without provincial registration. That same IP had hosted Thomas Grady's teletherapy profiles. Same address listed on the MindBridge Health PDF his wife had submitted. So Grady wasn't just a fraud. He was a repeat fraud. He printed the new findings, 1 page at a time, clean. Organized, no emotion. That came later. He flipped open a backup folder titled Personal Lauren Pre-Deployment, Inside Bank Records, downloaded months earlier as part of joint tax prep. Nothing suspicious at first glance. Then he found it. A wire transfer entry dated 5 months ago from a company called Stratus Consulting Limited into a newly opened joint account Lauren had never disclosed. The memo line, service retainer, domestic consultancy. Amount $48,000 CAD. That wasn't therapy money. It was extraction money. He accessed Sophie's iPad backup encrypted mirror on Halo Cloud. There, in an auto-saved Notes app entry, he found something odd. A list, written in Sophie's childlike spelling. Mom's questions for after Dad calls. What color is Dad's laptop? Is the code box still under the drawer? Did he smile or frown? Where does he put his phone when cooking? He stopped reading. The handwriting was real, not staged, not coached. Sophie had simply internalized the routine, a game, a scavenger hunt. He exhaled slowly. The betrayal was no longer theoretical. It was operational. Back in the report from Grady, Ethan now reread one section with different eyes. Children exhibit low reactivity when father appears on screen. Mother confirms emotional inconsistency from partner leading to household anxiety. He pulled the security footage from 3 weeks prior. Video call 9:03 p.m. Ethan had asked how school was. Lauren had said fine. Aiden didn't look up. Sophie played with a rubber band. He'd attributed it to screen fatigue. Now he understood. They weren't cold. They were confused. Unarmed children being nudged into strategic roles. He called Marcus again. This isn't just manipulation. He's using them as data points. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think Lauren knows?" Ethan hesitated, not because he doubted, but because the truth was more corrosive than the question. "I think she thinks she's in control." He paused, then added, "But she's not the strategist. She's the compromise." At 0700, Ethan walked out into the snow document folder tucked under his arm, the cold punching against his lungs like restraint. The Canadian Forces liaison at base security raised an eyebrow when Ethan requested a clearance-coded consultation. "You okay?" Staff Sergeant Ethan answered without blinking. "Need to log a potential hostile access point. Domestic vector. Ongoing." By 10:45 a.m., the documentation was entered into military chain of custody protocol. Ethan retained certified copies under Personal Civil Protection Initiative. He didn't explain the children, didn't mention the toothbrushes next to Lauren's now hidden phone, or the smell of Grady's cologne once lingering on the kids' jackets. Those things didn't matter in affidavits, but they mattered to him. Back in his quarters, Ethan opened Sophie's last video message from her birthday. She was holding the camera too close. "Hi, Daddy. Mom says Dr. G might help us see you more if court says yes." He paused the frame. Behind her, taped on the fridge, was a child's drawing. It showed a stick figure family. 3 people. Sophie, Aiden, Lauren. No Ethan. Instead, beside the 3, a smaller figure with a clipboard labeled in pink marker Dr. G. He stared at the image until the lines blurred. Lauren hadn't just tried to erase him. She'd already replaced him. He opened a blank notebook and wrote 2 words in block capitals: evidence architecture. This wasn't about custody anymore. This was an extraction model, built by someone who knew the playbook from the inside. Grady wasn't improvising. He was executing a standardized protocol. One Ethan had seen before overseas in civilian surveillance campaigns where NGOs were co-opted by intelligence services, use influence, seed trust, distort narrative, and then disappear. This time the theater wasn't Baghdad or Kyiv. It was Burnaby. And the target wasn't government assets. It was him. The husband. The soldier. The father. The firewall. But not for long. The folder was thin, but it felt heavy in his hand. Ethan placed it on the desk like a weapon, his only one. Inside were timelines, transcripts, screenshots, patterns of a life manipulated into evidence, a marriage restructured into ammunition. He had spent weeks gathering truths, silent truths, ones that couldn't shout over a courtroom's polite lies. Now it wasn't just about proving he was right. It was about proving he wasn't dangerous, because someone somewhere had decided that grief made him unpredictable, that war made him unstable, that fatherhood in his hands was a calculated risk, and someone was about to put that belief in front of a judge. He stared at the subpoena again. A date, a time, a courtroom number, filed not in rage but in strategy, typed in Courier new font, as if to remind him this wasn't personal, just procedural. But Ethan knew better. There was nothing more personal than being erased with civility. He stood, straightened his uniform, and walked out not like a soldier preparing for battle, but like a man preparing for a trial he never asked for against an enemy he used to call home. The envelope was stiff, cream-colored, and heavy with implication. Not government-issued, not military, civilian legal. Inside a subpoena from the Burnaby family court, petitioner Lauren Pierce, respondent Ethan Callahan, requests temporary suspension of contact between the respondent and two minors, Aiden and Sophie Callahan, pending psychological reevaluation. Ethan read it twice. It didn't sting. Not like betrayal. It settled lower, in the spine, in the bones, because now it was official. His wife wasn't just angry. She was organized. He placed the envelope down with surgical precision, then called Arthur Choi. Arthur didn't speak for the first full minute after reading the PDF Ethan sent. Then dryly, "Congratulations. You've been prejudged, pre-categorized, and pre-weakened before even entering a courtroom." Ethan raised an eyebrow. That bad Arthur scoffed. "This is textbook psychological deconstruction, the PTSD angle, the unreliable narrator framework. You're not being accused of doing anything. That's the beauty of it. You're being painted as someone who might." He leaned forward on screen. "They're not arguing fact. They're arguing possibility." Ethan said nothing. Arthur continued. "This Rachel Mahoney, she's tactical, very polished. She won't scream. She'll raise questions. She'll get Grady on the stand. He'll cite emotional indicators and suggest precautionary distance. They're not aiming for a fight." He paused. "They're aiming to disqualify you gently." The courtroom smelled like old wood and filtered resentment. Ethan sat in full uniform, not for intimidation, but for context. A quiet statement. "This is who I am, not the story you're selling." Lauren arrived in civilian clothes. Simple, neutral. Grady trailed her like a shadow in a tailored coat, expression unreadable. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, gray-suited, and economical with empathy. Rachel Mahoney rose first. "Your Honor, we're not here to question Mr. Callahan's service. We respect it deeply. But concern for the children's emotional safety must come first. Our petition simply asks for temporary suspension of unsupervised contact pending formal evaluation." Arthur replied without drama. "My client has no record of misconduct, no criminal history, no threats, no instability. The only documentation of psychological concern is authored by a man with no verified credentials." Rachel smiled, surgical. "With respect, Your Honor, Dr. Grady's findings are based on observed behaviors corroborated by both children. He has over 15 years of experience in trauma-informed family mediation." Ethan watched it unfold. No one called him unfit. No one said he was dangerous, but the word precautionary echoed louder than any accusation. Grady took the stand. He was calm, measured, disarmingly warm. It's common for returning soldiers to experience cognitive dissonance between tactical discipline and domestic unpredictability. Children often misinterpret this as anger or distance. He turned, slightly looked directly at Ethan. "In Sophie's drawings, her father appears without a face. That's a trauma marker." Arthur objected. The judge allowed it to stand. Grady continued. "This isn't about blame. It's about ensuring emotional stability during reintegration." Lauren didn't look at Ethan. Not once. The judge thanked both sides and requested Ethan submit to an independent psychological evaluation within 14 days. Until then, he could see the children once a week in a supervised environment. No ruling on custody, no criminal implication, just a soft wall, built brick by careful brick. And Ethan was now on the outside of his own life. Outside the courthouse, the cold didn't bite, it numbed. Ethan stood on the steps, the paper still in his hand, now damp with melted frost. He hadn't argued, hadn't lashed out. He knew better. They were waiting for that, for the flash of temper, for the soldier-turned threat. Instead, he took a breath, one long exhale, and walked back to the parking lot. Arthur followed a few steps behind. "They used your silence as evidence, Ethan. That's the part that stings." Ethan nodded once. "I know." Arthur shook his head. "You don't need to be innocent anymore. You need to be prepared." Back in the bunkhouse that night, Ethan laid out all the documents like maps of a battlefield. Custody schedules, digital call logs, Sophie's voice memos, the financial transfer from Stratus Consulting Limited still unacknowledged by Lauren's team. Everything they had on him was psychological projection. Everything he had on them was buried in metadata and implication. But implication didn't win in court, narrative did, and right now Lauren controlled it. He opened a fresh document, titled it Vulnerabilities, Legal and Emotional. He began typing primary narrative Ethan =unstable emotionally. Distant trauma-afflicted secondary Lauren, protective measured responsible collateral leverage. Children's perceptions, manipulated memory, structural risk. Independent psych eval could backfire if framed wrong. He stared at that last line, because that was the next step. A state-appointed psychologist would now determine whether Ethan was safe, not as a man, not as a husband, but as a father. He closed the file, opened another window, typed in court-certified trauma psychologists, BC province. He needed someone neutral, but experienced. Someone who wouldn't flinch at the word military. He found a name. Dr. Yara Kessler, former trauma consultant with Veterans Affairs Canada. He booked the evaluation, paid out of pocket. Didn't tell Arthur. Not yet. Some fights weren't legal. Some were reputational. And some had to be fought inside one's own skin. 3 days later, Ethan sat across from Dr. Kessler in a sparse office with low lighting and neutral paint. She didn't take notes for the first 10 minutes, just watched. Then she said softly, "Tell me the last time you felt like a father." Ethan didn't blink, before the lies became bedtime stories, before a stranger's voice replaced mine on my daughter's iPad. She nodded, didn't react, just waited. He continued, "I was deployed. Yes, I was tired. Yes, but I was never absent. Not until someone else rewrote what presence meant." Dr. Kessler asked no more questions that day. She simply said, "Thank you." Ethan walked out feeling lighter. Not healed, just named. For the first time in months, someone hadn't treated him like a bomb waiting to go off. But the war wasn't over. It was just learning how to speak a different language. The ruling wasn't a door slammed shut. It was a window cracked just wide enough to let in supervised visits and second guesses. Ethan took it. Not because he accepted the terms, but because it gave him one thing no testimony could time with his children. And children, when spoken to gently, often speak back with truth no adult dares put in writing. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and stale upholstery. Supervised visitation center. Neutral ground. No hugs longer than 5 seconds. No closed doors. No raised voices. Ethan sat at the small round table, waiting. Aiden entered first. Taller now, hoodie zipped halfway, then Sophie clutching a squashed plush rabbit. Behind them, a staff monitor nodded politely and took a seat in the corner. "Hi, Dad." Aiden said flat. "Hi, baby girl," Ethan whispered to Sophie. She climbed into the chair beside him but didn't meet his eyes. He didn't push, didn't ask about school or homework, just offered a quiet, "It's good to see you both." Aiden nodded. "Then Mom says this won't be forever." Ethan tried to smile. "I hope not." Sophie piped up, "Doctor. G says people get better when they stop pretending." The words hit like a slap wrapped in lace. Ethan didn't flinch. He just tilted his head. "What else did Dr. G say?" Aiden crossed his arms. "That sometimes soldiers come back different, like broken." He avoided his father's gaze. Ethan leaned back slightly, the plastic chair creaking. "Do I seem broken to you?" Aiden looked unsure. Sophie answered instead. "Mom says it's not your fault. War makes people forget how to be soft." The monitor coughed subtly, reminding Ethan of the boundaries. He nodded, swallowed. "Did Dr. G say that at your school?" Sophie shook her head. "No, at Miss Carla's house." Ethan paused. "Miss Carla, she's Mommy's friend. She has a big gray couch. We go there when Mom has errands." Aiden added, "Dr. G meets us there sometimes. He brings puzzles and juice." The room tilted. Ethan knew that name. Carla Mendez, listed once on Lauren's social media. An old friend. No professional title, no licensed practice address. "Does he work there?" Ethan asked carefully. "No," Sophie said. "He just talks and writes things." That night, Ethan reviewed provincial therapist regulations, Grady wasn't licensed to practice outside of a designated clinical space. No private homes, no informal settings. If he'd met the children at an unregistered location repeatedly, it was not only unethical, it was illegal. Ethan compiled every mention of Carla's house from previous transcripts, dates, audio clips, voice memos. He aligned them against Grady's known appearance logs from the Halo network. 3 matched. Grady had met Ethan's children outside all regulatory frameworks. He had weaponized informality, built trust through juice boxes and casual games, not therapy, not counseling, conditioning. Ethan drafted a report, clean, coded. Title, Non-Compliant Therapeutic Exposure, Minor Subjects. He included IP trace logs showing Grady's device within Carla Mendez's home subnet, clips of Aiden referring to sessions outside school, provincial law citations on restricted counseling zones. Voice clip from Sophie Dr. G said, "Don't tell Dad, it'll just make him more tired." He forwarded the dossier to Arthur C. Seed to a secure watchdog node connected to British Columbia's College of Psychologists. Then he sat back, and for the first time since this began, he allowed himself a single whispered word. Gotcha. The pieces were falling into place. Illicit contact, manipulated narratives, tactical silence. Ethan wasn't trying to win custody in the courtroom anymore. He was trying to collapse the infrastructure of deception one breach at a time. Because if Grady had broken the law, then maybe, just maybe, the truth could start talking louder than the lies. And if the courts wouldn't hear it, someone else would. The file was 22 pages, every page precise, emotionless. He didn't need anger. He had evidence. He sent it not just to Arthur, but to 3 additional recipients. Mia DuPont, liaison officer at Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, the College of Psychologists of British Columbia, the Office of the Child Advocate, Western Division. No subject lines, just encryption headers and auto-expiry access tokens. The system would speak for him. Marcus called the next morning. "You made noise." Ethan didn't deny it. "Good. Maybe someone finally hears it." Marcus hesitated. "I ran one more layer on the IP trail. Grady's personal device pinged near 2 different military communication facilities in the past 6 months." Ethan stiffened. Was he surveilling? We don't know. But guess who he's linked to through Stratus Consulting Pause? Lauren Worse, a third-party data mining firm that contracts behavioral analytics to provincial family courts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was weaponized bureaucracy. That afternoon, Ethan received a message on his secured line. Anonymous, no signature, just a download link. He opened it, a video file, Lauren's face on screen, recorded from her phone. Intentional, clear audio. "Ethan, you're watching." "I know that." "You've always watched behind the cameras, behind the codes." She took a breath. "But the court doesn't care why you recorded. They care that you did. Surveillance, Ethan. On your own children. You'll try to make this look like defense, but it looks like obsession, and obsession doesn't get custody." She leaned closer to the lens. "You taught me to study weaknesses, to map blind spots. I never forgot." Click. End. He stared at the screen. She had turned Halo against him, the same tool he built to protect them, and now she was using it as evidence of coercive control. He closed the file, opened a second one, his own draft video response, already recorded, just in case, no anger. Just fact. He wasn't going to send it to her. He was going to send it to the same people who'd received the dossier. Attach Lauren's video, her words. Let them ask why a concerned mother was threatening surveillance exposure like a bargaining chip. Let them ask why a licensed therapist had helped coordinate a counter-narrative. He wrote one final note beneath the email. "You don't have to yell to be abusive. Sometimes you just have to be calculated. Send." Then he walked outside, into the snow, hands bare, face raw, but heart steady. Because this time the silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, and war wasn't always about who hit first. Sometimes it was about who documented better. The silence didn't last long. Ethan had expected pushback. What he didn't expect was how fast the machine moved once its wires were exposed. Grady disappeared from his online profiles. Lauren's lawyer filed new motions, and the court, silent but watching, tightened its grip on the narrative. He hadn't won. He'd only rattled the door, and now every lock was being reinforced. It started with a polite email. Subject notice of emergency motion filing. Pierce v. Callahan. No threats, no accusations. just a clean PDF attached bearing the letterhead of Mahoney and Klein-Lawren's legal team. The motion was clear, an injunction to terminate Ethan's digital access to all household surveillance and historical Halo data. Reasons cited psychological endangerment due to obsessive behavioral tracking. Arthur didn't even blink when Ethan forwarded it. This isn't about surveillance. This is erasure. They filed a response tight strategic, but the court ruled in favor of Lauren. Effective immediately, Ethan was required to surrender all digital backups and revoke his remote access rights. He had 72 hours. Halo went dark on a Tuesday. Ethan watched the final camera feed blink into nothingness. The front porch, the kitchen island, Sophie's reading corner, gone. Not just the images, the presence. For months, those feeds had been his only tether to his children. Silent proof that they were alive safe, still brushing their teeth at 8:30 and leaving cereal boxes out like always. Now, all of it was smoke. He backed up the drives one last time onto an offline SSD, not to disobey the court, to remember. Because when people erase you, sometimes memory is all you get to keep. Arthur met him at a quiet cafe in North Vancouver. No uniforms, just two men and bitter coffee. They're not trying to win with truth, Ethan. They're trying to outlast you. Ethan said nothing, just stared through the glass at a woman helping her toddler cross the icy street. Arthur slid a folder across the table. This is the formal affidavit Lauren submitted. She included transcripts of Sophie saying she felt watched inside the house. Grady's footnotes claim your surveillance system creates a domestic stress perimeter. Ethan closed the file slowly. She's not trying to protect them from me. She's trying to redefine what fatherhood means in digital terms. That night he went for a run. No destination, just asphalt and anger. He stopped at the water's edge, breath ragged, and screamed. No one heard, or if they did, they didn't look. Back home, Marcus called. "We've got something." He sounded out of breath, excited. "There's a node, a data sink inside one of Grady's VPN loops. It pulls metadata from residential smart systems and uploads daily behavioral summaries to a server cluster tagged under Domestic Behavioral Insights. Guess who funds that cluster? Ethan didn't guess. He already knew. Stratus. And indirectly, family court analytics firm. He didn't sleep that night. He wrote, he compiled. He began building a new dossier. Not just as a father, not just as a soldier, but as a witness. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do isn't scream or fight or run. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is prove you were watching, even when they told you not to. He walked back slowly, steps heavy, shoulders looser, not from relief, but from resignation. Some battles weren't meant to be won, only documented. At his desk, Ethan reopened the old Halo interface, now a hollow shell. The cameras no longer streamed, but the structure was still there. Code lines, heat maps, event logs. He knew the patterns by heart. 8:07 a.m., Sophie feeds the cat. 8:31 a.m., Aiden leaves cereal on the counter. 9:00 p.m., Lauren dims the lights in the living room, always 34%. They weren't just habits, they were data. And someone had been watching them too. He isolated a heat signature mid-November. Movement in the hallway at 2:13 a.m. 3 nights in a row. Not the kids. Not Lauren. Grady. His ID badge wasn't authorized, but his phone had pinged the internal network briefly enough to leave a trace. Marcus helped confirm it. Grady had used a proximity spoof to mask entry into the house. A gray area hack common among private security contractors. Untraceable by civilians, but not by military-grade audit tools. Ethan packaged the timestamp, the source ID, and the spoof signature into a separate encrypted folder, then attached it to the growing file, Pattern Manipulation Evidence Set B. He didn't send it yet, because this war wasn't ready for proof. Not yet. It was still too busy pretending it was just a custody dispute. He stared at the empty feed one last time, then shut down Halo for good, not because he gave up, but because he was switching weapons. Some wars end with gunfire, others end with silence. Ethan had switched off Halo, closed the last digital portal to his children. But silence didn't mean stillness. Because while the cameras had stopped recording, the consequences of their existence had just begun to speak. And sometimes, the most painful echoes came from the mouths you once tucked into bed. The supervised visit was held at a different center this time, brighter walls, cartoon decals on the windows. But Ethan barely noticed. He was watching the way Aiden fidgeted with his sleeves, the way Sophie's eyes kept glancing at the staff monitor in the corner. They sat one on each side of him, a triangle broken at the base. "How's school?" he asked gently. "Fine," Aiden mumbled. Sophie didn't answer. She kept stroking her rabbit's ear over and over. Ethan waited. The silence felt like velvet stretched too tight. Then Sophie said quietly, almost to herself, "Mom says it's okay to feel watched." Ethan blinked. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "Doctor G says watching isn't the same as loving." The words hit like cold steel. "And what do you think he asked?" She didn't meet his gaze. "I think sometimes love is too loud." Ethan swallowed. His throat burned, but he kept his voice steady. "Do you feel like Daddy's love is loud?" Aiden shifted. "You always knew when we left the lights on or when I opened the fridge after bedtime. That's not normal, Dad." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's protective, not punitive, but it feels like the house had eyes." Sophie's voice trembled. "Dr. G said Halo is like a monster with blinking walls." That night, Arthur forwarded him a transcript. Session summary from Sophie's school counselor. She'd been asked how she felt when staying with her dad. One line underlined by the staff psychologist, "I feel like I have to hide." It wasn't the sentence. It was the fact she hadn't said it with fear. She'd said it with adaptation, as if she'd learned to navigate life with him like someone navigates fog cautiously, tenderly, from memory, not trust. He sat for hours rereading the file, not angry, just hollow. He didn't blame her, not Sophie, not even Aiden. They were children, and children echoed the rooms they were raised in. If someone taught them that care was surveillance, that protection was paranoia, then that's what they'd believe. And Ethan, he had tried to love them in high definition, in motion sensors, in timestamps, in logs. He had mistaken precision for presence. Marcus called again. "You okay?" Ethan didn't answer. Marcus sighed. "You know this isn't on you, right? This is narrative war. You built systems. They weaponized interpretation." Ethan closed the file. "No, Marcus. I built a fortress, and forgot that even fortresses cast shadows." Back at the visitation center the next week, Sophie hugged him goodbye. It wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Then she said softly, just before walking away, "Dr. G says we shouldn't keep secrets. So I told him about the red light in your study." Ethan frowned. "The red light, the little one, on the black box. It blinks when it hears stuff." She smiled, innocent, then ran to catch up with her brother. Ethan sat frozen. The red light on the box. That was his audio monitor trigger, part of an old system he'd installed only in his own workspace. Never in the kids' rooms. Only one person would have ever pointed that out to them. Grady. That night he opened the old schematic, cross-referenced every sensor log from that device, and found a spike. 2 weeks ago. Audio engagement triggered by voice near the door. "Don't tell Daddy, it's just our secret," female voice. Not Lauren. Likely Carla. Session offsite, unsupervised. Again. Another red line crossed. He clipped the audio, embedded it with metadata, titled it simply, "When Surveillance Becomes Instruction," and added it to the folder marked "For the Hearing." That night Ethan didn't go home. He drove. Nowhere in particular. Just far enough that the city lights turned into shadows and the shadows into nothing. He parked on the edge of a gravel road and sat in silence for an hour. Then 2. He thought of Sophie's face, bright open, once full of questions, and now measured, filtered, like someone rehearsing the right answers in the wrong language. He remembered the first time she fell off her bike, scraped her knee, how she screamed not from pain but from fear of his reaction, and how he'd knelt, kissed her temple, said, "It's okay to fall. I've done it too." She had cried then, honest tears, raw. Now her tears were trained. She cried only when appropriate. Only when it didn't inconvenience the adult room. He thought of Aiden, how quiet he'd become. The house had eyes. It was meant to be metaphor, but it had landed like judgment. Ethan opened his notes. Began to write not strategy, not legal rebuttal, just memory. A list. Things I did right. Made every birthday even when deployed video calls at 4 a.m., built a dad switch app so they could call with one tap, learned to braid hair. Badly. Still did it. Things I did wrong. Forgot that cameras don't hug monitored when I should have listened. Watched too much, trusted too little. He stopped writing, because what hurt most wasn't the list. It was the question beneath it. Did they ever feel safe because of me or in spite of me? 2 days later, Arthur sent another update. Lauren's team is pushing a new narrative coercive environment via predictive behavior modeling. They claim Halo created anticipatory anxiety in the kids. Ethan reread the sentence. They're framing algorithms as emotional abuse. Arthur replied, blunt, yes, and it's working. There was no case law for this, no precedent, just impression. And in family court, impressions were often more powerful than facts. He met Marcus again this time not as a hacker or ally, but as a father asking another man, did I break them? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Then you didn't break them. You tried to protect them in a world that doesn't reward silent protection. Pause. But they don't see the danger you fought. They only see the shield you forgot to put down. Ethan looked out the window. Snow was falling again. Quiet. Clean. As if nothing underneath it was broken. That night he recorded something new. Not for court. Not for evidence. Just a message. To Sophie. To Aiden. One day you'll ask why I watched. Why I installed cameras. Why I knew when the cereal box was empty or the light was left on. It wasn't because I didn't trust you. It was because I didn't trust the world to notice if something went wrong. You were never the ones I was monitoring. You were the ones I was guarding. He saved the file. Encrypted it. Labeled it, if you ever wonder, Dad. And closed the laptop. Not because the pain was over, but because he finally knew it had a name. The pain had a name now. That should have made it easier. But it didn't. It made it real. And reality doesn't soften with recognition. It hardens. So Ethan stopped asking if he had failed. He started asking who had designed the system that made his children feel like love came with blinking lights and red warnings. It was Marcus who introduced them. Daniel Shu, ex-cybersecurity lead turned whistleblower. Former consultant for a minor investor at Stratus Data Solutions. They met in a parking garage beneath an empty downtown office block. Daniel insisted. It's not paranoia, it's protocol. You're not the only one they've mapped. He handed Ethan a drive. What's on here? Proof that Stratus doesn't sell wellness. They sell narratives, emotional trendlines, predictive custody outcomes. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Explain. Daniel inhaled slowly. They mine behavioral metadata from smart homes, especially where therapy consultants like Grady are involved. They compare child reactions to parental stimuli, tone response time, proximity compliance. They feed this into machine learning models that advise family court strategists indirectly, of course. The courts never see the source. Only the analysis. Grady's job isn't just to talk to kids. It's to collect clean emotional data. And you, Ethan, you were a perfect control case. A system builder. A former soldier, predictable, traceable, targetable. Back at his apartment, Ethan plugged in the drive, hundreds of files, labeled with neutral codes, but inside summaries, visual graphs, emotional compliance charts. One labeled, Subject C274 / Domestic Feedback Patterns / Child Impression Index, Burnaby Region. He recognized the heat maps. Sophie's room, Aiden's study space. Feedback loops mapped from their voice interactions. Sentiment scores. They'd been running experiments on his children. He called Arthur. We don't just have misconduct now. We have industrialized manipulation. Arthur listened stunned, then said, this could collapse more than a case. This could trigger review panels, maybe even a civil suit. Ethan didn't respond right away. Then quietly, what if they knew from day one I'd break and they waited camera by camera until I looked exactly like the threat they needed me to be? Arthur said nothing. Because he couldn't deny it. That night, Ethan wrote a new file. The Algorithm of Influence. He attached 3 pieces. A video clip of Grady coaching Sophie about the red light. A data schema from Daniel's drive showing predictive emotional mapping. A voice note from Sophie. Sometimes I feel like I'm a question they're trying to answer. He didn't send it yet. But this time he knew exactly where it would go. Not to the court. To the press. Because systems don't break from inside. They break when someone outside finally looks in. The last line he typed before logging off. They watched us. Now let's make them visible. Some battles you fight in silence. Others the world demands you scream. Ethan had built his case brick by brick, data by data, but he was never the one to light the fuse. That honor went to someone outside the courtroom, outside the custody battle, someone with a pen, a platform, and nothing left to lose. The story broke at 7:06 a.m., front page of the Vancouver Sentinel, byline Zara Delcourt, investigative journalist. The headline wasn't loud, but it was precise. The algorithms of family, how private firms shape custody outcomes through emotion mining. Ethan didn't read it all at once. He skimmed, paused, read again. The first 3 paragraphs introduced Emotion Index Labs, a subsidiary of Stratus Data Solutions operating as an emotional analytics consultancy. Then came the heat maps, photos of children's bedrooms, rendered not in color but in compliance probability zones. Red meant resistance, yellow meant adaptive compliance, green full submission. His daughter's room was on page 2. The article explained how Stratus partnered with child therapists under digital resilience research mandates. Grady was named directly. So were 5 other licensed professionals in provinces across Canada. And in smaller print, in all reviewed cases, participating parents were never informed of the parallel behavioral analysis conducted through passive data scraping. Consent was presumed under third-party contract clauses. Below that, a quote, "We trusted the therapists. We didn't know they were treating our children like predictive models." Parent from Calgary name withheld. Ethan's phone lit up. First Arthur, then Marcus, then an unknown number. He answered none of them. He was still staring at the graph labeled Subject C274 / Vocal Compliance Trajectory Burnaby Zone. Sophie's voice, tracked across weeks, mapped for stress modulation. The caption chilled him. Child demonstrates emotional shift following therapeutic intervention. Notably reduced verbal resistance when referencing non-primary guardian. They had taught her not to cry when she missed him, because crying meant non-compliance. Zara had included a section on custody court software contracts procurement documents, showing that provincial family courts licensed behavioral insights through anonymized dashboards, all ethically sourced from participating providers. But there was no real anonymization. Stratus knew who the families were. They just replaced names with codes. The system was designed to advise judges indirectly through emotionally optimized outcome suggestions. In simpler terms, it told the courts what kind of parent made the least noise on paper. Ethan never stood a chance. The final section of the article was titled, "He Watched to Protect." They called it control. It wasn't about him by name, but it was him. A military veteran, built his own home security for peace of mind, recorded interactions not to intimidate but to remember. And somehow, it had become evidence against him. The article closed with an interview clip. "I just want my daughter to know I didn't watch her to scare her. I watched because no one else was." Anonymous source, voice filtered. But Ethan knew it was his own. Marcus must have sent the clip to Zara without telling him. He wasn't angry, he was grateful. Because for the first time, someone had spoken his language back to the world. That evening, the article went viral. #algorithm parent trended across Canada. Senators called for inquiry. The Minister of Children and Family Development issued a statement. "We are reviewing the integrity of all analytics-related processes tied to provincial custody evaluations, but the most important message came as a text. From Lauren, you need to stop. This is spiraling beyond us. We can still fix this." Ethan didn't reply. Because some things don't get fixed, they get revealed. Truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs daylight. And now that daylight had arrived, so did the panic. Not from Ethan, from the people who'd built glass houses and called them clinics. Truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs daylight. And now that daylight had arrived, so did the panic. Not from Ethan, from the people who'd built glass houses and called them clinics. The emergency motion came fast, filed less than 48 hours after the Sentinel expose. Lauren's legal team requested a full stay on all public disclosures, citing emotional distress, reputational damage, and risk to minor dependents. But the court denied it. Instead, they called for a special hearing. Witnesses to include Ethan, Lauren, Dr. Grady, and if available, Zara Delcourt. Arthur texted Ethan only 2 words, "Game on." Before the hearing, Lauren requested a private meeting. Neutral ground. A family mediation office near Kitsilano. Ethan agreed. She arrived alone. No lawyer, no makeup, just Lauren, the woman he once knew. I didn't know about the Stratus pipeline, she said. Not the data mining, not the court feeds. Ethan didn't speak. She exhaled, trembled slightly. I thought Grady was helping us, helping me, after you came back different. Still he said nothing. Then came the ask. I'll walk away. Full custody, no appeal. But you need to stop the press. This doesn't help anyone now. Ethan leaned forward. You want me to silence the only thing that listened when the court didn't? They'll come after us both. Sophie. Aiden. They'll be labeled. No, he said quietly. They'll be seen. He stood up and left her in that room. The courtroom was full. Not with people, with silence. Everyone knew what this was. Not a hearing, a reckoning. Grady was the first to speak, polished, calm, prepared. Until Zara presented an email, dated 4 months prior, from Grady to a Stratus coordinator. Subject family C-274 update narrative resistance high. He stammered, asked to review the email. Then in a move no one expected said this was done under strategic guidance from the mother's legal consultant. Gasps. Lauren turned pale. Her lawyer objected. Too late. The statement was on record. Ethan didn't react, not visibly. Inside, everything slowed. This wasn't vindication. It was confirmation. He'd spent months questioning if he was losing his family. But in truth, someone else had been drafting the script. All he'd done was resist the role. When his turn came, Ethan submitted 3 files. A heat map of Sophie's room during therapeutic visits, a transcript showing metadata alignment between Grady's sessions and Stratus recommendations. A clip of Sophie whispering to her friend Mom says Daddy's face scares people. That's why he doesn't get to stay. He didn't elaborate, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the judge and said, I never asked to win. I asked to be heard. That's all any father wants when the cameras stop and the court goes quiet. The judge didn't rule that day. But he said this. When technology enters the home, it must do so with consent. When it enters the court, it must do so with scrutiny. And then he adjourned. Outside, it was raining. Lauren didn't speak to him, but Sophie did. She took his hand, didn't say a word, just held it, like she used to, like maybe she remembered. The ruling came 4 days later. No press, no drama. Just a sealed envelope delivered to both counsels and a quiet notice on the family court's public docket, joint guardianship reinstated, primary residence transferred to father, supervised transitional review for 90 days, Dr. Grady's license under investigation, data evidence flagged for legislative ethics review. It wasn't a victory, it was an opening. Arthur read the judgment aloud over coffee. They didn't want to set a precedent, so they wrote the ruling like a concession. Ethan nodded. Not angry, not elated, just still. Later that day, he received a message from Sophie's school. An appointment had been canceled by Lauren weeks earlier, a father-daughter writing workshop. Now it was back on. She wanted to go. He stood outside the school gym, paper in hand. It was titled, A Letter I Never Sent. He read it aloud, voice steady. I don't know how to unwatch. I don't know how to be less alert. But I do know how to show up. I do know how to stay. This is me trying. Sophie didn't say anything right after. But when they got home, she drew something. A house, 2 windows, one with curtains open, inside 3 figures, one tall, 2 small, all holding hands. Lauren didn't appeal. Maybe she couldn't. Or maybe for once she chose stillness. Ethan wouldn't ask, because some endings need no echo. Zara called him days later. The story's gone national. Stratus is facing a multi-provincial review. He thanked her, but didn't ask for updates. Because justice isn't in headlines. It's in the quiet shift of a child's gaze when they stop looking at you like a stranger and start seeing home again. On the final review day, Sophie handed him a sealed note. Don't open until I'm not scared. He didn't. He placed it on the shelf next to his medals. Because courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just a folded piece of paper waiting to be trusted. He never opened the note, not because he was afraid, but because some promises deserve to be kept whole until the person who gave them is ready to see them broken. The house still smelled like lemon oil in winter. Ethan hadn't been here in weeks, maybe months. Not properly. Not as a father. Not as someone who belonged. The door creaked in the same spot. The living room lamp still leaned a little to the left, and on the far shelf above the dusty piano the old Halo box sat quietly. Dead, but not gone. He didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to the study, opened the top drawer, pulled out the last encrypted USB drive. It held everything: the raw logs, the video overlays, the pattern scripts Marcus had helped design, the whole spine of the case. He turned it over in his hand. Cold, familiar. Then he walked out back, lit the fire pit, and dropped the drive in. He didn't watch it melt. Just stood there, palms open to the heat. Because some truths served their purpose once, and then deserved to disappear. Behind him the door creaked again. Aiden's voice soft. Was that the Halo stuff? Ethan turned, nodded. Why'd you burn it? Because it already did what it was built for. Which was? Ethan looked up at the smoke rising into the gray sky. To protect. Just not the way I thought. Aiden didn't ask more. He just stepped closer and stood beside his father. Like maybe this was the start of something that didn't need recording. The fire had burned low, just embers now, glowing like old stars that hadn't realized they were dying. Aiden sat on the porch step, Ethan beside him. No words for a while, only the small creaks of cooling metal and the wind in the trees. Then Aiden asked, not accusing, just curious, did you ever think we hated you? Ethan didn't flinch. I thought you were scared of me. Not hate, just distance. Aiden nodded, picked at the edge of a splintered step. It wasn't the cameras. It was how quiet you were. Like you saw things but didn't feel them with us. Ethan looked out across the yard. Sometimes I felt like if I said the wrong thing I'd lose you. So I said nothing. Thought being precise was better than being present. Aiden didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, when you were gone, Mom said you were always watching. But it felt like a test. Like we were being graded. You weren't. You were just the most important thing I ever tried to protect. Aiden leaned his head against Ethan's shoulder. It wasn't a hug, but it was the closest thing to home Ethan had felt in years. And when Aiden finally whispered, I don't think I hate you. Not anymore. Ethan exhaled, a long, tired breath he didn't know he was holding. That's enough. The fire had gone out, but something else had stayed warm. Not the porch, not the air, but the silence between father and son, no longer tense, just shared. And somewhere beyond that stillness, a smaller voice waited. One that had stayed folded in an envelope for far too long. The letter had sat untouched for days. He'd moved it once from the shelf to the drawer, then back again. Sophie noticed. You didn't open it yet? Ethan shook his head. You said not to, and I never stopped listening to you, even when it hurt. She nodded, fidgeted with the sleeve of her hoodie. You can now, if you want. Ethan didn't hesitate. He opened it slowly, inside a folded piece of pink notepad paper. A faint doodle of a house in the corner. A sun with uneven rays. 5 words written in shaky handwriting, I never stopped loving you. He read it once, then again. His throat tightened, but no tears came. Not because he didn't feel, but because sometimes healing doesn't look like crying. It looks like finally breathing without guilt. He looked at her. Sophie's eyes didn't flinch. I was mad, but I was also scared. I thought, if I loved you too much, Mom would be sad. Ethan nodded. That's not your job. Loving someone shouldn't feel like betrayal. She climbed onto the couch beside him. You still have that red light thing. He smiled gently. No more blinking lights, just windows. You can close them or open them. Your choice. She didn't answer. She just leaned her head on his arm. No camera would ever record that moment, and that made it even more real. Not every story ends in silence. Some echo outward through whispers, then articles, then policy. And while Ethan's house finally found quiet, the world beyond its walls had only just begun to speak. The headlines were colder now, not sensational, just formal. Stratus group under legislative review, ethics committee questions, data practices, in family courts, therapist, licensing board, suspends Grady, pending investigation. There were no apologies, just memos, no criminal charges, just consultations. But it was enough to make systems flinch. Zara called Ethan again. There's talk of a new bill, mandatory consent in all emotional data collection for minors. Your case triggered the debate. He didn't ask for details, just said, make sure the next father doesn't have to burn proof to be believed. She paused, then said, you're not just a source anymore. You're a precedent. He hung up before that could land too heavily. 1 week later, a reporter knocked on his door. Young, earnest, holding a mic and a question, Mr. Calver. Do you have a message for other parents? Ethan looked past her to the window where Sophie's drawing still sat taped on the glass. The one with 3 figures holding hands. He didn't hesitate. I'm not a message. I'm not a lesson. I'm just a father, and I'm home. Then he closed the door, softly. No need to make a sound. You don't rebuild trust with tools. You rebuild it with mornings, with laughter over burnt toast, with sticky notes instead of alerts. With questions answered face to face, not by a screen, but by someone who stayed. There was no tech involved this time. No sensors, no blinking lights, just a corkboard on the kitchen wall, pinned with small paper tags, one for each day, each with a color-coded sticker. Green for good, yellow for May, red for don't ask yet. It was Sophie's idea. Aiden added his own system sticky notes left on the fridge, Dad, hydrate. Stretch your back. Breathe slower. They called it Halo 2.0. But it wasn't about surveillance. It was about presence. Ethan never checked the notes right away. He let them sit so the kids knew they weren't tasks but gifts. And one night, as Sophie drew a little blue heart beside Tuesday's green sticker, she whispered, You don't need to film us to remember us anymore. Ethan smiled. I never needed to. I just forgot how to be with you instead of around you. That night, the board stayed blank. Not because it was a bad day, but because sometimes the best days leave no data. Just warmth. The library basement didn't have microphones, just plastic chairs, weak coffee, and a sign that read, Community Voices Parenting After Loss. Ethan sat in the 3rd row, flanked by posters of overdue book finds and recycling guides. He didn't plan to speak, but when a father next to him stood up, voice-cracking hands shaking, Ethan's fingers curled against his knee, then uncurled, and he stood. I used to think being a good dad meant being ready, having answers, proof. He glanced around. Turns out my daughter didn't need proof. She needed to know I'd stay even when I didn't have the words. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. Another asked, What did you do after you lost them? Ethan didn't flinch. I learned to lose without disappearing, because sometimes showing up broken, confused, unsure is the bravest thing we do for our kids. No applause. Just silence. Not heavy. Full. Later, someone passed him a note. I haven't hugged my son in 6 years. Tonight I will. Ethan folded the note. Didn't keep it. But he remembered. Because words like that aren't souvenirs. They're seeds. He wrote it on scrap paper. Not on a will form. Not in a file. Just in his notebook. The one with water stains from years ago and a torn corner Sophie once tried to fix with glitter glue. He titled the page, Things I Want You to Keep Even If I'm Not Around. Then beneath it he wrote, Don't ever think love has to be earned. If someone makes you feel like that, walk away. I wasn't always right, but I never left. Your fear is not your fault, but your bravery, that's all you. You're allowed to outgrow my ideas. Just don't outgrow kindness. He folded it 3 times, then again, until it was the size of his palm. Sophie found it the next morning. What's this, a kind of will? Not about stuff, about memory. What do I do with it? Ethan pointed to the stairs. Throw it like a plane. She smiled, ran up, opened the hallway window. Aiden stood below, waiting. She launched it. It dipped once, caught a breeze, and landed right in Aiden's hands. He opened it, read the first line, then nodded. Didn't say a word, just held it up like a flag. Some legacies don't go down, they fly. If you're watching this and you feel unseen, if you've ever whispered, I'm still here to a child who stopped looking, this story is yours too. You don't need a courtroom to be worthy. You don't need a witness stand to prove love. You just need to stay. Stay when the door closes. Stay when the camera blinks off. Stay when they scream they hate you because one day they might whisper they didn't mean it. Ethan Calver didn't win. He didn't want to. He just refused to disappear. And maybe that's what fatherhood is. Not presence that performs, but presence that persists. So if you know someone fighting quietly, if you are that someone, send this story to them. Let them know they're not a lost cause. They're a legacy, still unfolding.